Every camera in the Pacific Northwest was pointed at Spokane last week. Homes burning in a residential neighborhood, families fleeing with pets in their arms, a city of 230,000 people under evacuation. It was, without question, a story that deserved the attention it got. But while that story dominated every headline, a fire more than 20 times larger than the entire Spokane complex was burning quietly along the Oregon-Idaho border. Most of the country never heard about it. The Big Grass Fire has now burned nearly 390,000 acres. It's the single largest active wildfire in the United States, and it barely made the news. Let's get right into it. Let's start with the numbers, because putting these two fires side by side tells you almost everything you need to know about how wildfire coverage actually works. At the peak of national attention on Spokane, the three fires making up the Spokane complex, Old Trails, Autumn Lane, and Fairview, had burned a combined 8,026 acres. That's a genuinely serious, destructive event, and we covered it in full on this channel because it deserved that coverage, with more than 700 structures destroyed and roughly 65,000 people evacuated from a major American city. But during that exact same stretch of days, the Big Grass Fire, burning in remote Malheur County, Oregon, along the Idaho border, had already passed 300,000 acres. As of the most recent report, it's grown to nearly 390,000 acres and sits at 39% containment. Run the math, and at the height of the Spokane story dominating national coverage, this single fire in southeastern Oregon was already burning at more than 20 times the size of the story everyone was watching. Today, that gap is even larger. So why did one fire get wall-to-wall coverage while a fire dozens of times larger barely registered? The honest answer comes down to what actually makes a wildfire story spread. Spokane is Washington's second largest city, home to more than 230,000 people. When a fire burns into an urban neighborhood, destroys homes block by block, and forces tens of thousands of residents to evacuate through city streets, it generates exactly the kind of visual, human-centered footage that spreads fast burning houses, families embracing outside evacuation shelters, dramatic aerial shots of smoke over a skyline. The Big Grass Fire is burning through remote rangeland and sagebrush in one of the least populated corners of Oregon, threatening ranches, livestock infrastructure, and small rural communities like Jordan Valley and Pleasant Valley, rather than a major metro area. Fewer people directly affected, no dense urban footage, no dramatic images of a city, skyline choked in smoke, and as a direct result, far less national coverage, even though the actual scale of destruction and firefighting resources committed dwarfs what Spokane required. Let's actually walk through what's happening at the Big Grass Fire, because this story deserves the same depth of coverage we gave Spokane. The fire ignited during a mid-July lightning siege and quickly exploded through dry grass and sagebrush terrain along the Oregon-Idaho border. By July 31st, it had already become the largest single active wildfire in the country, sitting at roughly 303,000 acres and 21% contained. Containment held steady around that level through the following days as a major wind event forecast for Saturday, August 1st, threatened to undo whatever progress crews had made. Fire weather forecasters described that weekend's conditions as critical to locally extreme, with gusts potentially reaching over 50 miles per hour through the northern Great Basin. By August 4th, the fire had grown to more than 343,000 acres, still holding around 25% containment. As of the most recent update, August 6th and 7th, the fire sits at approximately 390,000 acres, with containment improved to 39%. Officials describe the fire as stable but not yet moving decisively toward full control, with crews continuing to work incrementally along more than half of its total perimeter. Laid out like that, day by day, the growth curve on this fire tells its own story. A fire that added roughly 90,000 acres in barely a week, even as containment slowly improved. That's exactly the kind of sustained, grinding fire behavior that rarely produces a single dramatic headline moment the way an urban interface fire does, but adds up to a genuinely massive incident over time. The human impact of this fire, while affecting far fewer people than Spokane's urban evacuation, has still been serious and ongoing. Level 3. Go now. Evacuation orders have remained in effect for the Pleasant Valley, South Mountain, and Jordan Valley areas throughout the fire's growth, forcing residents out of rural communities and ranch land across both Malheur County, Oregon, and Owehee County, Idaho. The fire's spread across the state line has required coordinated emergency response from 2 separate states simultaneously, and officials have specifically flagged threats to nearby transportation routes and critical infrastructure serving these already isolated rural communities. State of emergency declarations and National Guard deployments have been activated in response, mirroring the scale of response usually reserved for fires threatening major population centers, even though the population directly in this fire's path is a fraction of Spokane's. For ranching families in this region, the stakes carry a different but equally serious weight than an urban evacuation. livestock that can't simply be packed into a car, fencing and water infrastructure that took years to build, and grazing land that supports a family's entire livelihood, not just a home. Losses in this kind of rural agricultural fire zone tend to be measured differently than in a city, but they are no less devastating to the people experiencing them. Now let's zoom out, because the big grass fire isn't burning in isolation either. It's part of a wildfire season that Oregon officials say has now become the worst in the state's recorded history. Oregon has officially broken its all-time record for total acres burned in a single season, with nearly 2 million acres lost so far in 2026, surpassing the previous record set in 2024. And there are still roughly 2 months left in the traditional fire season. As of this week, Oregon has 48 still active wildfires, impacting more than 1.5 million acres across the state. The Big Grass Fire isn't even the only massive undercovered fire burning right now. The Roe Creek Complex, burning in central Oregon, currently sits at more than 320,000 acres with 53% containment. The Coleman Creek Fire, also in Oregon, has burned more than 212,000 acres and remains at 0% containment. Individually, any one of these fires would be the single biggest wildfire story of most fire seasons. This year, they're competing with each other for attention that mostly isn't coming because none of them are burning through a major city. Stack those 3 fires together with the Big Grass Fire, and you get a combined total well north of 900,000 acres burning simultaneously across Oregon alone, none of which generated anywhere close to the coverage volume Spokane received in a single weekend. Let's talk about the national picture, because this pattern of underreported megafires extends well beyond just Oregon. The national preparedness level has now sat at 5, the maximum on the scale, for 3 consecutive weeks, meaning virtually every available national firefighting resource is already committed somewhere across the country, with essentially no slack left in the system if a new major fire breaks out. The number of states experiencing above normal fire risk has climbed from 16 to 17 just this week. Nationally, more than 29,000 individual fires have burned in excess of 2.3 million acres so far this year. Underlying all of it is the same drought pattern we've discussed throughout this fire season. Nearly 48% of the lower 48 states are currently in drought, with the Southwest running close to 90% coverage. The western United States came out of the 2025-2026 winter with record low seasonal snowpack, and the southern Rockies in particular finished the winter historically dry, priming fuels months ahead of the normal schedule. Cured grasses and timber across the Great Basin and interior west are already burning as readily as they would typically burn in late August, weeks ahead of when that level of fire danger usually arrives. Add to that another round of building heat forecast across the northern tier this week, expected to re-dry fuels in Montana and Idaho at the exact moment the Pacific Northwest is reaching what forecasters are calling peak fire receptivity. This means the underlying conditions driving all of this aren't easing up even as individual fires like Big Grass slowly gain containment. Here's what makes this genuinely worth understanding. Beyond simply pointing out a media attention gap, it reveals something important about how wildfire risk actually gets communicated to the public. A fire burning in a remote, sparsely populated region doesn't threaten fewer resources or demand less firefighting effort just because it generates less coverage. If anything, fires like the Big Grass Fire often burn longer and require more sustained resource commitment precisely because they're harder to access, harder to fully surround, and burning across more rugged, difficult terrain than an urban interface fire. The firefighters, National Guard members, and emergency personnel working the Big Grass Fire and the Roe Creek Complex are managing operations at a scale most of the country has no idea is even happening, simply because there's no dramatic urban footage attached to the story. It's worth sitting with just how large the resource commitment behind a fire like this actually is. Sustaining operations across a fire approaching 400,000 acres, spanning 2 states for the better part of a month, requires a scale of personnel, equipment, and logistical coordination that rivals or exceeds what's needed for a much shorter, more visually dramatic urban fire event, even though the public attention runs almost entirely in the opposite direction. There's also a real public safety cost to this attention gap. When national coverage concentrates almost entirely on one high-visibility incident, it can create a skewed public perception of where the actual wildfire emergency is worst, potentially leaving residents in genuinely high-risk rural areas with a false sense that their situation is less urgent, simply because it's less visible in the news. Officials in Malheur County and Owyhee County have had to manage a serious, evolving cross-state emergency, largely without the kind of sustained national attention that tends to accelerate donations, volunteer support, and broader public awareness of evacuation needs. That gap in awareness can translate directly into a gap in resources and support reaching the families who need it most, simply because their disaster didn't happen to unfold on camera in front of a city skyline. Let's be clear about something important here, too. This isn't a criticism of the coverage Spokane received. That story deserved every bit of the attention it got. An urban wildfire disaster of that scale in a city that size, with hundreds of structures destroyed and tens of thousands evacuated, is a legitimately historic event for Washington State. And we covered it in full because it mattered. The point isn't that Spokane got too much coverage. It's that a fire more than 20 times larger, burning at the same time, deserved to be part of the national conversation too, and largely wasn't. If you have friends, family, or property anywhere in Malheur County, Oregon, or Owyhee County, Idaho, here's what you should know right now. First, level 3. Go now. Evacuation orders remain active for Pleasant Valley, South Mountain, and Jordan Valley. If you're in any of those areas and haven't already left, do not wait for further confirmation. Second, road closures tied to this fire are affecting transportation routes across both counties, so check official state transportation resources before traveling through the region rather than assuming normal routes are open. Third, containment on this fire has been described by officials as stable but not yet moving decisively toward control, meaning conditions could shift again with the next wind event. So continue monitoring official updates even if the fire appears to have plateaued. Fourth, if you're supporting relief efforts for Pacific Northwest wildfire victims this season, consider organizations working specifically in rural Malheur and Owyhee counties, not just the higher-profile Spokane relief efforts, since these communities are managing real losses with far less public visibility and, likely, far less donation support as a result. And finally, whether you're in an urban fire zone like Spokane or a rural one like Jordan Valley, the same core preparedness principles apply. Know your evacuation level, keep a go bag ready, and never assume a fire's size or seriousness based purely on how much attention it's getting in the news. Here's the honest bottom line on everything we've covered tonight. The Big Grass Fire is, right now, the largest active wildfire burning anywhere in the United States, at nearly 390,000 acres, and climbing toward 40% containment after weeks of sustained fire behavior. It's burning alongside at least 2 other Oregon megafires exceeding 200,000 acres each, during a season that has already broken the state's all-time wildfire record with 2 months still left to go. None of that diminishes what happened in Spokane. It simply means the full picture of this historic Pacific Northwest fire season is bigger, more widespread, and affecting more communities than the headlines most people saw this week would suggest. This is exactly why we try to cover this season with real breadth on this channel, rather than chasing only whichever single fire happens to be trending on a given day. Because the families in Jordan Valley and Pleasant Valley are living through a genuine disaster too, even without the national spotlight Spokane received. I'll be back with updates as containment on the Big Grass Fire continues to develop, and as this record-breaking Oregon fire season keeps unfolding. If tonight's breakdown helped you see the fuller picture of what's actually burning right now, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next update. Stay safe out there, take care of each other.